Appreciate the opportunity of being here. It's good to be with you to share a little bit about what the Lord has done in my life, through my life, and what He continues to do. I was fortunate enough to be raised in Wilmington. I'm a rare native. There's not many of us here anymore, but I'm grateful for that opportunity that I had to be a native of Wilmington and lived here many, many years. Grew up in a Christian home and accepted Christ at a very young age, 7 or 8 years old, in Vacation Bible School. Took me a while to get baptized, but I did finally get baptized. And my family was at church every time the doors were open. We didn't we weren't a part of the Lily and Poinsettia crowd. We went every Sunday. And we were there all the time, many nights on Wednesday night as well. And there's so many people that influenced my life during that time. One was a Sunday school teacher that I had who was a maintenance man for the Corps of Engineers. And I just encourage you, if you have the opportunity to influence young men and women, boys and girls in your church, take that responsibility very seriously, because I still remember Mr. Felton Baker and what he did for me and the influence he had in my life. You can play a great, great role in doing that. Went off to college, as Bob mentioned to you, and my life hadn't changed so much when I became a Christian, because I'd grown up in a Christian home. It was just kind of more of the same. It was an internal change, but as far as what I did and activities I was a part of, it didn't change. And I got to college and I heard these students talking about how they were miraculously saved from this terrible, sinful life. And my testimony just sounded kind of weak and mundane. And I thought for a while there, maybe I need to go out and work on my testimony and make it a little better. But I didn't think that would probably be the right thing to do. And somewhere along the way in there, I felt the Lord calling me to full-time service for Him, but I never did anything about it. Never acted on that at all. I got married to my high school sweetheart. Those of you that, how many Wilmingtonians are here? Any native Wilmingtons here? A few of you here. You may remember a store in North 17th Shopping Center called Golding's, toy craft and hobby store. I married Suzanne Golding, and so married her, dated her for 4 years, and we had the first of 3 daughters that we would have. Life was good. Daughter number 2 was on the way, and we were enjoying life. I was doing some real estate construction then, doing a little bit of developing in a real estate company. And my father was 50 at the time. He was a production manager at Babcock and Wilcock, if you remember that company that used to be here in the Wilmington area. And he died very unexpectedly. At age 50, he had a blood clot, and it just took him out just like that. It was a devastating blow. I really couldn't believe that it had happened that quick. He was a good father, but he was a great friend. So we buried him on my second daughter's due date, and she was born 3 days later, and so we were grateful for her. Several days later, I was at my dad's office at Babcock and Wilcock cleaning out his desk, and he was a Sunday school teacher at our church, and he had worked on a Sunday school lesson that he never got to give. And one of the quotes that he had written on a legal pad was, in relation to this lesson, what has God asked you to do that you haven't done? And I started thinking about that. And so it probably won't be a surprise to you to hear that 6 to 8 months later, I found myself in a 24-foot U-Haul on the way to Fort Worth, Texas, to go to Southwestern Baptist Theological Seminary. And we were there for several years and got an opportunity to get a seminary's degree. What a great opportunity that was. 2 daughters and a wife moved to Fort Worth, Texas. Went in seminary housing. We were in 516 square feet of house. And I was in seminary. I got a job with the seminary. I was a seminary lifeguard. I lifeguarded when I was growing up at the beach, and so I was lifeguarding there in the seminary pool. And then I got a job at Sears working in the luggage department until I found a church that would allow me the opportunity to serve them. So I went to First Baptist Saginaw, Texas, which was north of Fort Worth. I was a youth minister there, and I think that's a job that everybody ought to have for 6 months. I mean, that will humble you just as much as a wife will. And if I want my wife to know I said that, I'll tell her. But we had a great opportunity to serve there in First Baptist Saginaw. The youth were great. We had a great opportunity there, and I got to preach my first sermon in that church. And if you've ever preached a sermon and you're in seminary, you're supposed to be able to do that. It's a daunting responsibility. I studied and studied and studied and studied, and I still wasn't prepared. And I got up to preach, and my youth, they just loved me. They had put a hangman's noose right behind the pulpit, hanging on a little door there, because they knew I was going to hang myself that morning. So I got up and preached, and when you're nervous, what do? Well, typically you preach a little too long. And so I did that, and I got through preaching. One of my deacons came up to me and said, "Son, I want to talk to you a minute." And this guy was a real cowboy. Now, how do you know he's a cowboy? Well, he wore a hat all the time except when he's in church, and he had a line right here that above which the sun never saw. But down here he was dark brown. He had on a pair of boots that could be a weapon if he kicked somebody, and he had a belt buckle with a buckle on it about the size of a deli tray. But he called me aside. He said, "Son, do you know what I do?" I said, "Yes, sir. I know you got a ranch, and I know you got some oil wells." He said, "That's right, I do." He said, "Let me tell you how I work that, son." He says, "I'll take my big rig out, and I'll go to an area where I think there might be some oil, and I'll bore for about 20 or 25 minutes, and if I don't hit anything, I'll quit. And I suggest you do likewise." So it couldn't go anywhere but up from that. The youth were gracious to me, and I appreciate them. We had a retreat one time with the youth, I remember. We were at the Tarrant Baptist encampment south of Waco, Texas. And we went down there, and we were going to have a long weekend together. And we were studying the story of Elijah. Now, if you remember the story of Elijah in 1 Kings 18, it's where the false gods were saying that we have the real God, and Elijah said, "No, I have the real God." And Elijah said, "Well, why don't you get your gods to call down fire from heaven, and let's see if they do that, and then I'll do that, and we'll see who serves the real God." So the false prophets just hollered all day long, and no fire, nothing happened, absolutely nothing. You remember then it was Elijah's turn. They built an altar with 12 stones which represented the 12 tribes. They built a trench around the altar. They laid fresh cut wood on the altar, and the sacrificial offering was placed on the wood. And Elijah told the men to pour 4 big jugs of water over the wood and wet it, soak it, and it was about 16 gallons of water that they poured on it. And he told them to do it again, go fill them up again. Let's have 32 gallons of water we put on there. And then he was going to call down fire from heaven to prove that he served the one true God. Well, we were going to be a little creative that night. So I was young, a little bit crazy, and we got a guy to be Elijah, and he got to be Elijah because he's the only one that brought an army blanket with him. And we built our altar. We dug the trench around the altar. We found a stuffed animal, and we let that be our sacrifice. And we poured water all over it, but we thought we'd put a little pizzazz in this. I found a 5-gallon can of gasoline. And evidently you knew something about gasoline that I didn't know at that point. But we poured that 5-gallon can of gasoline over all of that stuff after we got through pouring it with water. Now, before this started, we'd found some fishing monofilament line, and we'd run it from the roof of a cabin down to the altar. And we'd put a roll of toilet paper on that monofilament line. We'd soak that monofilament line with gasoline. And at the appointed hour, when Elijah was calling down fire from heaven, guy was going to light that thing and throw it down the wire to the fire. Well, folks, we had a small explosion. We blew out 3 windows in the encampment, and they called the fire department. they didn't ever allow anybody to do anything with fire at that encampment anymore. I saw a young man in an airport in Atlanta several years later, and he said, "Brother McCarthy," he said, "you remember when we blew up the camp?" I said, "Yeah, I remember." But somehow or another, I graduated from seminary and came back home, went to Winter Park Baptist Church from Fort Worth, Texas. Never thought I'd do that, but I did, and I served there. Then I was at Judson Baptist Church in Nashville, Tennessee. Had great opportunities, served on the staff at Pine Valley Baptist Church for a while. And then I had an opportunity to start teaching in Bible study fellowship. I was in the real estate business, and I was really wanting to have a men's Bible study, and I found out about Bible study fellowship, so I said, what I'm going to do, I'm going to have the men's prayer group meet in my office, and that'll be my contribution, because I found out to start a BSF group, you had to have a prayer group first, and then you started it, and if it all went well, then you could start the BSF men's group. So we had the prayer group in my office, and to make a long story short, I ended up being the teaching leader for 9 years. Didn't intend to do that, but what a blessing that was for me. And in doing that, I had the opportunity to interact with a lot of other people who were BSF instructors. One of them was Lee Whitehurst. Lee and I have known each other a long time when he was a teaching leader up in the Raleigh-Durham area. And I also met Danny Lotz and his wife Ann, which is Billy Graham's daughter. And so they were BSF leadership. So through them I met Franklin, and Franklin kept after me, wanting me to come to work with him. He said, "You've got a seminary degree, you've got a business degree, a lot of what we do is ministry, a lot of what we do is business, so we could really use the gifts you've got." So those are the opportunities I had, and I went to work with the Billy Graham organization and had some great opportunities. I'm going to show you a little bit about that in just a moment and tell you about Billy. And go ahead. And people always want to know about Billy when I start telling them what I used to do. Tell me about Billy. And I can only tell you that he is exactly what you see on TV when he's one-on-one with you. There's no two sides to Billy Graham. He's the same man. What a good, good man. What a good, good man. I remember one time I was with him. I think we were in New Orleans after Katrina. We were holding a crusade down there, a combination between him and Franklin. And Billy and I were in the green room by ourselves, and we were just sitting there, and I started talking to him. And something I always wanted to ask him, I said, sometimes, you know, we really get busy and you just don't have time to do your quiet time. I said, how do you handle that when you get busy and don't get to have the quiet time that you'd like to have, that you feel you should have every day? And he thought a minute and he said, I don't remember ever missing a day. So when I got myself off the floor, I decided that I wasn't going to ask him any questions like that anymore. But what a great opportunity it is to work for him. Billy and I share the same birthday. We're both born on November 7th. So I'm probably one of the few people that gets a phone call from Billy on their birthday. He told me a number of years back that he was getting so old he couldn't remember anybody's birthday but mine. So, but I'm going to take you down memory lane just a little bit. This tape is a little bit dated, but I want you to see what a normal year was for me when I was traveling. Had 178 people in 24 countries, and some of the things we were doing.
This is definitely going to be a mark of something new and something big.
The awesome power of God being exhibited here is just unbelievable.
It's just like a preview of what heaven's going to be like, walking around seeing all the love and all the joy.
You can be alive tonight in Jesus Christ.
My hair's standing on ends, and it's like you can feel the presence of the Holy Spirit here.
He's alive. He's in heaven. He's here tonight.
Thousands of people coming to know Christ. That is great success.
The Billy Graham Evangelistic Association took the message of salvation through Jesus Christ around the world in 2006. November's Okinawa Festival in Japan concluded an exciting year for the Crusade Ministries team as they brought the good news to hundreds of thousands worldwide.
Jesus Christ will change your life tonight.
At the Gulf Coast Festival in Mobile, Alabama, churches, denominations, and races came together to support the gospel message. The Louisiana State Penitentiary in Angola celebrated a transformation. In a place once known as the bloodiest prison in America, the good news now thrives. In New Orleans, Billy Graham and friends joined a celebration of hope. This special festival celebrated our ongoing commitment to the storm-battered region's recovery. The Billy Graham Evangelistic Association's rapid response chaplains and Samaritan's Purse were on the ground within hours of Hurricane Katrina, sharing Christ's love.
I think the celebration of hope, probably even in my 14 years of being here and ministering in this community, is one of the most impactful things that has ever happened to this community.
Welcome to Baltimore!
In July, the Metro Maryland Festival drew large crowds to one of America's signature ballparks. An unforgettable energy rocked Baltimore's Camden Yards.
Camden Yards stopped being a baseball park and became a house of worship and a house for salvation.
He knows my name.
In Quito, Ecuador, the Festival of Hope was the largest evangelistic outreach in the country's history, highlighting a growing openness to the truth of Christ. The Central Canada Festival in Winnipeg drew overflow crowds to its downtown arena and a nearby church, as thousands came forward to accept Jesus Christ. And in the Philippines, the Metro Manila Festival set attendance records as the message was delivered in a spectacular setting.
You can't imagine what it was to sit on the platform the last night and see way over 100,000 people, and everybody was singing praise to God. It was a sea of hands.
And Jesus said, whosoever liveth and believeth in me shall never die.
And my friends, you are dead in your sins, but you can be alive tonight in Jesus Christ.
Whosoever believeth in him shall not perish, but have eternal life.
And a new voice is emerging to take the good news to future generations. North Carolina's Greater Gaston County celebration with Will Graham drew a total crowd of more than 12,000, with hundreds responding to the call to accept Christ. The year's festivals featured music that inspired people of all backgrounds.
Since Jesus came into my heart,
I'd rather have Jesus than silver or gold.
Jesus is the answer for the world today.
My hope is
built on nothing less than Jesus' love and righteousness. You are brighter, my darkest night. These days I walk on the streets of gold that were paid for me. Let the redeemed of the Lord. Yeah. But if we are the body, why aren't his arms reaching? Saw my children singing glory, glory, hallelujah.
More than 680,000 people attended our festivals and celebrations in 2006, and more than 56,000 made decisions for Jesus Christ. But the impact of these events transcends mere numbers, as new witnesses will continue to take Christ's message of salvation to the ends of the earth.
The Franklin Graham Festival has bridged the gap to make a difference, not just for 2006, but for the future.
We all came together, and I mean, the heavens opened. Every door, every window was open.
Our vision in 2007 is to reach even more people with the news of the risen Savior in locations across the United States and around the world.
I wish I had the opportunity to tell you stories about every single city, because I've got stories about every city that I wish I could tell you. I'm going to share just a couple of stories in a couple of cities, and then we'll be through. But there was a crusade we had in Johnstown, New York one time, and during the crusade there was an elderly lady that was down front, and the counselors weren't quite sure what to do with her, and I told them I'd be glad to talk with this lady. So I went up to her and I was talking to her, and she said, "Oh, Sonny, I've been a Christian a long time." And I said, well, I just saw you were upset and I thought you might like to have some prayer. She said, see that man over there? I said, yes, ma'am. She said, that's my husband. We live a 1 hour and 20 minutes from here one way. And I've been praying all week that he would come with me to a service. Tonight's the last night, and he said he'd come. I said, that's great. She said, but that's not the best part. She says, he's accepting Christ right there, right now. I said, that's great. She said, but that's not the best part. I said, well, tell me what the best part is. She said, I've been praying for him for 57 years. I don't know about you, but if I pray 57 days, I get a little restless. 57 years. Never forget that little lady. So many things I could tell you. I want to share with you about one opportunity we had at Angola State Prison. This is in Louisiana. It was considered the bloodiest prison in America. It was the largest penal system in the United States. There was a warden there by the name of Burl Cain. And Burl did a lot of things to help this prison. He opened up their rodeo grounds to let us have a crusade. Every year at Angola, they have the Angola Rodeo, and prisoners are riding horses and roping cattle, and people come in from the community to see it because they're very good. And this is the stadium where they hold this event each year. And so we were allowed to go in there and have a crusade. So many experiences here I wish I could tell you. So many craftsmen that are incarcerated there. When Franklin was there and he saw some of the woodworking that they had done, Franklin commissioned those guys to make 2 caskets. His mother was buried in one, and the other one's in storage for his daddy. Gorgeous oak caskets that they make for the inmates that are buried there. But you can see here, and you can see right here, that's a fence. And that separates, all these are prisoners, and that's a fence that kept the prisoners away. This is the fence here, and these are all prisoners. All down here is our counselors, and we were able to go in and train the counselors in the inmate population so that when we had the crusade, they were the ones actually sharing with the other folks. What a great opportunity this was. And there you can see inmates talking to inmates as people make decisions for Christ during that crusade. This is Warden Burl Cain and Franklin, and they're walking in one of the houses. This is an unusual house. I'm going to show you some pictures that are a little bit upsetting. You may have never seen pictures like this. This is death row. This is where people that are have received the death sentence, and they're waiting that date that's in their future. And we went in and we met with every person on death row. We had prayer with them, and you can see the warden there, Burl Cain in the blue, and then the assistant warden there in the yellow, and then Franklin is talking to some of the guys that are sitting there on death row, waiting for their either to be given a new trial or to be executed. And here's one of the men talking to Franklin through the bars. All of them wanted him to pray with them. They were looking forward to that. They gladly did that. This is a room where the night before a person is executed, they are able to order whatever they'd like to eat. This is the room where they have that last meal before their execution. And you'll see this picture of lions and lambs all together on a picture. And this was a picture that was actually drawn by some of the prisoners. You'll see those 2 doors there that Burl Cain is standing in front of. The one to the left is the execution chamber. The one to the right is where people can go to view the family, law officials, officers of the court. This is the actual execution chamber at Angola State Prison. You'll see the 2 phones on the wall. in case the governor would commute a sentence at the last minute. You can see the gurney that they strap the people down on, and their means of execution is lethal injection. Burl Cain said the first one he was there for, he didn't talk to the man about the Lord, and it just bothered him that he didn't. He said after that, every single execution, he was always in the room with the man. And he always asked him, would you like for me to hold your hand? And he said, without exception, they all said yes. And he talked to every one of them about the Lord when he was doing this. There's the window, the one-way glass mirror where the executioners are. There's two of them in there. There's IVs in either arm. One of them has the real potent injection. One is an inert subject, solution that's nothing, and neither one of the executioners know which one has the real one. They come in through a door in the back. They don't ever come in through that area where they are. The two glass windows there, the glass window on the left is where media, court officials are. The glass window on the right, and there's a partition between them, is where family, if they want to be there, can be there. And you can see there is a microphone right there on that wall. If the prisoner has any last words or anything he'd like to say to his family, that's what happens there. Burl Cain changed this prison from being the bloodiest prison in America to one of the calmest by segregating the population. If you and I were there in that prison and we started causing a problem, he would separate us. We'd never see each other again. He had 12 different camps. He had 12 churches that were built with private money. This is one of the 12 churches he had. He had pastors that were inmates that were the pastors. There is a seminary education by extension from New Orleans Baptist Theological Seminary that is held on campus on Angola State Prison. So they have 12 churches. They have a 24-hour, 7-day-a-week Christian radio station that somebody runs and plays Christian music and reads Scripture. That's in this prison, the bloodiest prison in America. This is now one of the calmest prisons in America. He has no problems. And these are nice churches. They're not shoddy at all. I mean, we would do well to worship there ourselves. But that's Burl Cain and Franklin. And Samaritan's Purse paid for the next chapel that was going to be built there so that they would have one in every camp. But what a great job Burl Cain did when he came there. You know, a testimony is not only what God did in your life and is doing in your life, but what He wants you to do tomorrow. And the things that we're about and He wants us to be about on a day-by-day basis. So if I could share with you a little bit of my journey, which started several years ago, and let it apply to you as it might. I was in Oklahoma City preparing for one of Billy's last crusades, and we had a weekend off, and I wasn't coming home, and so we found out that there was a Titanic exhibition in town. And you could go in and see a lot of the artifacts that were recovered off the ocean floor. Very, very interesting. You go in, and they first give you a ticket. And the ticket had a name on it. And that you were either a first class, second class, third class, or crew. I was a crewman when they gave me my ticket. And I walked in the exhibition, and I looked around at all these artifacts, and they were in the glass cases, and there were jewelry, there was clothing, there was luggage, there was a piece of the grand stair rail, there was a crystal, there was coins, there was currency, there was linen, there was glasses, eyeglasses. Just an amazing amount of things that you meander through this display and just envisioning what these people went through during that 2 hours many years ago when the Titanic, the unsinkable ship, went to the bottom of the North Atlantic. But an interesting thing to me was as you exited the exhibition, you took your ticket. And there was 2 big signs on the wall. One said saved, and the other one said lost. And you take your name and you go find your name on one of the two big posters, and you can see whether or not you made it. I didn't make it. I was a crewman. But you know, I got to thinking that day that we could do the same thing here in Wilmington. We could make two big signs, one that says saved and one that says lost. The only difference in our signs that we would have here in Wilmington is some names could move from the lost to the saved, depending on part on what you and I do. But on the Titanic list, those names will never change. They'll always be there. You know that there were 700 survivors in the Titanic tragedy, but more than 1,500 died. I want to tell you something that you may not know. Did you know that the Titanic, the unsinkable ship, only had 20 lifeboats on it? Do you know how many lifeboats it would have needed to have evacuated that ship? It would have needed 40. They had half the number of lifeboats they needed to evacuate the ship. So when the tragedy occurred and this great ocean liner was going down, people put on their life jackets, and some that could got into the lifeboats, the 20 lifeboats that were there. Others just fell into the frigid, cold water, hoping that somebody would pick them up. And here the people go off rowing away in their lifeboats. Folks, the lifeboats were less than half full. There was room for hundreds more people in the lifeboats. But they were afraid to come and get them. They thought it was too dangerous. Only one lifeboat of the 20 came back to get people and save them. And they only saved 6 additional people. When the funeral ship arrived 2 days later from Nova Scotia, they had a really ghostly sight that they saw. 328 life-jacketed men, women, and children floating in the water, frozen. Now, why did those people die? Why did they die? They did not die because the Titanic sank. They died because the people that were saved wouldn't come back and get the ones that weren't. They did nothing. They did nothing. And I got to thinking, is this not a spiritual picture maybe of you and I today and where we are? We're riding along in God's lifeboat. We kind of like it there. We can sing lifeboat songs. We figure out ways to make our lifeboat bigger, more comfortable. And yet there's people all around us drowning and dying. And we're just enjoying our safe condition. So I encourage you to think about what it is that God would have you to do. What does God ask you to do that you haven't done? You know, when we were saved from a terrible place called hell. But we were also saved for something. So I ask you today, are you doing that for that you were saved for? What are you doing for God today that makes a difference? I know when we go to funerals, we think about people and say, what was their relationship with the Lord? And we wonder what we could have done or what we should have done to make sure that they knew the Lord. That's not the time to think about it. Time to think about it is today. So I pray that God will put on your hearts and minds some people that only you can reach, that you'll have an opportunity to talk to on this side while you can, and that we can then be about those things that God saved us for. God bless you.